I will talk a little bit about the site next. For context, for those of you that are not familiar, we are talking about this property on the corner of Lawrence Expressway in Benton, next to the church in Santa Clara. The county previously used this site as a roads property. The roads department has shared with us that they no longer have a need for the property. And in about 2014, the Board of Supervisors directed that any county land that is surplus or no longer needed for another county purpose be considered for housing, permanent housing or interim housing. It is used as a tree lot during the holiday season. And we, as county staff, as I mentioned earlier, have identified the property as a potential site for safe parking or temporary shelter interim housing. To give you one more image, from the top, you will see this is what it looks like during the holidays as for a Christmas tree. And then the image on the bottom shows you what it looks like when it's not in use for that. I think you've heard us say several times that we don't actually have a project defined just yet, but we did want to share with you what the target population and referral process could look like. Hopefully tonight we will learn more from you about what your needs are in the community. But essentially city and county staff will be working together to develop a referral process that leverages our county's existing supportive housing system while taking into consideration the needs that Adam mentioned about the unhoused population specifically in the city of Santa Clara. We do see that there is some alignment there between what the city is interested in doing, what the county is interested in doing, and have the opportunity to leverage existing systems and a partnership with Life Moves. So for instance, in the initial phases, we would develop an outreach strategy with service providers that serve the unhoused population in the city of Santa Clara, public safety teams, and the county outreach teams. And we would provide an early preference for people that have a connection with the city of Santa Clara. On the right is just an image of our supportive housing system. So you can see that we use coordinated assessment, and then we have this kind of emergency shelter interim housing. But we are jumping ahead. I wanted to move on to the estimated timeline. So you will see we're very early in this process. We're currently in the community engagement, and this includes community listening sessions, understanding from you as a community what the sentiment is around the proposed site, share with you the community vision and goals for the property that we have envisioned, and work with you to address any and mitigate any concerns, and provide you with updates through our website and through 2 community meetings that we will be hosting. And again, the intent is to invite you to shape what gets proposed on the site. Then in April, we will go to the City Council. Life Moves city and county staff will report back on the input that we received from you all, and have a conversation with the City Council about what they would like to do in terms of next steps. So here we've laid out the possible next steps, assuming that the position at the time in April and the direction from the City Council is to continue to pursue the site. There will be some action that also needs to happen at the Board of Supervisors level. Again, a lot of this is contingent on the conclusion of our 3 community meetings and the recommendation that we make to the City Council for consideration. So the items and actions that have to happen after we complete the community engagement are subject to change. This is just to give you an idea of what the estimated timeline and process looks like, and then make sure that we're connecting that as we move along in the process. We will be moving into the input and Q&A session, but before we start to look at your Q&A and take those folks that have their hands raised, we have already received quite a bit of input and questions from the community members. And so we wanted to start with a few discussion questions that the panelists and myself can answer. And then we'll be working to make sure that these are posted on our website. So first question that we received, is this a done deal? It is not a done deal. Currently we have direction from our board, we have direction from City Council, we have a desire from Life Moves to advance the site, and we want to hear from you. Following our community meetings, we will make a recommendation to the City Council. Where do I submit my thoughts about this proposal? In the next 2 slides, we will be providing you with contact for Life Moves if you're interested in learning about how they operate their sites and their service delivery model. If you're interested in talking to the city, we will provide you with Adam Marcus's email. And if you're interested in connecting with the county, I will be providing my email address. The next 2 questions are for the Life Moves team. Actually, I'm sorry. The third question, we're all going to chime in here, and that is, why are you considering interim housing and not permanent housing at this site? So I'll kick us off just again by referencing the board referral. For those of you that are not aware, the county has been actively pursuing the production of permanent housing. Over the last 5 years or so, we have in our pipeline now over 4,000 units of permanent housing, of which 2,700 are specifically for permanent supportive and rapid rehousing. There is a gap in our system for shelter beds. In fact, tonight there are over 100 people, if not more, that are waiting for shelter across the county. And I will first hand it to the city and see if anybody would like to chime in on that front.
I can add a little bit to that, Consuelo. Yeah, as you mentioned in previous slides, the city of Santa Clara already does have some supportive housing units already operating and more on the way in our pipeline. We also have a tenant-based rental assistance program, which is sort of a temporary assistance, but we don't have immediate shelter. And so when people call the city asking what to do, we really have to refer them out to other cities. And during these cold weather periods, those fill up pretty quickly. So we have been getting calls and people really having nowhere to go. And so if you think of housing as a sort of a ladder with rungs on it, similar to the supportive housing system, you do need that rung between, between being on the street and waiting for a permanent placement. And so having that temporary, shorter term opportunity is important.
Thank you, Adam. And why does Santa Clara need to provide interim housing?
Well, we've heard that people, it is difficult to travel across the county. And people are already here. There's, as you showed in your earlier slides, there's a fairly high number of people, some of which are affiliated with this with the city, some of which were counted in the one-time point in time count. And so we know that as those numbers go up, the demand for shelter here is enough to where having a shelter in Santa Clara, that's what the numbers show us. That's what the outreach and the input from all of our stakeholders who work day in, day out with unhoused residents. That's what we hear consistently, is there's a need for shelter here.
Thank you, Adam. And question number 5, how is this type of interim housing different than congregate settings? So I will call on Brian to kick off the response for the Life Moves team.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So every single adult or couple will have their own locked door, their own window, their own HVAC, a desk if they'd like it, storage space. And so people are more likely to move in and take advantage of the unit. Middle-class people value privacy, but the unsheltered folks value privacy as well. That's kind of a universal. So since the pandemic, we've developed only interim housing or non-congregate housing. People will access it. They will come off the street and utilize it for a next step.
Thank you, Brian, for that. The next question, which I will also pivot to you, who will be allowed to stay at the potential interim housing site?
So, of course, people that will be prioritized will be people from the city itself. from Santa Clara itself. Referrals generally go through a coordinated entry system that prioritizes local folks, and it's basically for everyone that can be safe in an interim housing site. In Mountain View, once we opened the one-day homeless count, the number of people living on the streets went down by about 50% once it was open. So we want to get those people living in vehicles, living in tents, living in parks, the people that spend their days at the library, so they have a place and a community of their own as they work on that next step.
Thank you, Brian. The next question, how will you prioritize unsheltered individuals from the city of Santa Clara? So perhaps I can kick this off by saying that unlike our permanent housing programs that are required to go through a specific order, so we manage a countywide list, we refer to that as the community queue, where we take referrals based on program eligibility. In the case of interim housing, we have the opportunity to partner with the host city to target and outreach specific areas in the city where we see more unsheltered individuals and kind of focus on that first. As the site continues to operate, then we do want to take people that are calling from the county's centralized hotline, but always keeping in mind if there's an opportunity to take people from the specific host city, that's our goal. And we have this very similar model in the city of Mountain View with the project that Brian mentioned, where we work very closely with the city of Mountain View to make that happen. And then obviously our priority is to make sure that no room or no bed is left unused. And so it's a balancing act, but we do work very closely with the city. Will people with a criminal background be permitted to stay in the interim housing? I'll kick it off just by saying that typically with interim housing, we do like to provide low barrier entry. But Brian, perhaps you can give us examples of what you do in other communities.
Yeah, so obviously nothing's been decided yet, but I certainly would hope that it would be open to people with criminal backgrounds. We'd rather have them under our supervision than in parks and libraries. We serve a lot of people re-entering from jail and other institutions, and they do really well. It's an important step to securing permanent housing. So although I don't think it's decided yet, I think the lower the barrier and the more people we can get off the street and away, basically, to be honest, out of the neighborhoods and away from the merchants, it's a plus for everyone.
Thank you, Brian. Will you provide 24/7 staff coverage?
Yeah, more than one person will be on duty 24/7, 365.
And are there rules and curfews for the people that will stay in the interim housing?
Yes, we have multiple rules. I'm not certain that we've decided on a curfew. Most of our sites do have curfews. There are some that do not. That's negotiated with the city and the county and Life Moves. But there are multiple rules, all focused on safety and housing retention and the next step, right? It's all about, again, being safe for volunteers, for staff, for the people using the interim housing site.
Thank you, Brian. And will guests be allowed on site?
We generally, again, nothing has been decided. We generally allow guests in the public areas. For client safety, we generally discourage it from clients' rooms. And obviously, usually day hours.
Thank you. And one question that we often hear both when we're looking at interim housing and permanent housing is the fear of an increase in the number of calls for service. Oftentimes we hear that public safety is called to the site. Brian, can you share with us your experience at other sites and what you see and maybe things you do to mitigate those calls?
Yeah, well, let me say that during the day when many of our adults are out working, the facility looks kind of like a geriatric facility. There's a lot of canes, there's a lot of walkers, there's a lot of wheelchairs, and most of our calls for service are for medical help and not for law enforcement help. So yes, there will be an increase in calls for service, but this is a vulnerable, frail, generally older population suffering from chronic health conditions. So yes, there will be an increase in calls from service, and the vast majority of those will be from medical assistance. Although we will probably have a licensed vocational nurse on site, that person generally helps to coordinate primary and behavioral health care services rather than deliver them her or himself.
Thank you, Brian. And the last question we've heard is, assuming that this project moves forward, who would I contact to answer my questions? So again, from the county staff or the county side, you will be seeing my email in later slides. We also will be providing Adam Marcus's housing manager for the city of Santa Clara. And then we have a contact with Life Moves. Once the site, assuming the site moves forward and it is in operation, those are the questions that a new contact information would be provided then. Okay, and before we open the Q&A, I just wanted to provide a quick reminder of the ground rules as we move into the Q&A session of this meeting tonight. We are here until 7:30. We invite all of you to share your experiences, but please be respectful of each other's opinions. Please type your questions into the Q&A box or raise your hand. We will bounce between written questions and inviting people to unmute to ask their questions. I will take down the presentation and I will help facilitate the Q&A.